He had stopped trying to remember how long he'd been alone, the moment time itself began behaving like a bored intern, showing up inconsistently, leaving early, and occasionally looping back just to mess with him. The outpost groaned around him, metal bones flexing with every slow orbit around a star that looked as tired as he felt. It wasn't dead, not yet, but it had the same expression he imagined he wore, barely holding on out of stubbornness. He leaned against a cracked console, watching the horizon through a fractured viewport. The light outside flickered, not in a dramatic way, just enough to suggest something was wrong but not wrong enough to be useful. Like most things in his life. "You're doing it again," he muttered, glancing down at his arm. The lines embedded in his skin shimmered faintly, thin and jagged like someone had tried to sketch lightning and then changed their mind halfway through. They didn't hurt. That would have been too simple. Instead, they pulsed with a quiet awareness as if they were waiting for something, or someone. He wasn't sure which option was worse. "I swear," he added, pointing at them, "if you start giving directions again, I'm ignoring you this time." The lines didn't respond. They never responded when he was being reasonable. A low hum rolled through the station, deeper than the usual mechanical complaints. He frowned, pushing himself upright. "Okay, that one's new." The hum didn't stop. It stretched, bending the air in a way that made his ears feel slightly out of alignment. The light outside the viewport shifted, not dimming, not brightening, but adjusting. Like reality was trying on a different setting and wasn't fully committed yet. He stared at it. That's not how stars work. The hum deepened. Then the room changed. Not suddenly. Not violently. One moment the space felt empty, and the next it felt occupied in a way that made the word empty seem like a lie he'd been telling himself. He didn't hear footsteps. There was no door opening, just a presence impossibly still, impossibly vast. He turned slowly. She was already there. His brain took a moment to decide what it was looking at. Tall didn't begin to cover it. She stretched upward in a way that made the ceiling seem like a suggestion rather than a limit. Her form wasn't fixed, edges shifting, soft and fluid, like light trying to remember how to be solid. Colors moved within her, faint and distant, like entire galaxies passing through a translucent shell. Where her face should have been, there was structure, but not one he could comfortably name. Rings of faint luminescence circled inward toward something darker, something that wasn't empty so much as unreadable. He blinked. "Okay." Silence, right, he continued, rubbing his temple. "So either I finally lost it, or you're real, and honestly I'm not sure which option is more offensive." No response. He gestured vaguely around the room. "Just to clarify, if you are a hallucination, you're doing a great job." Very detailed, slightly unsettling, points for commitment. She didn't move, but the air around him tightened. Not physically, not enough to stop him from breathing, just enough to make each breath feel observed. His arm burned. He sucked in a sharp breath, looking down as the lines along his skin flared with sudden light, brighter than he had ever seen them. They shifted, rearranging slightly like symbols trying to correct themselves. "No," he said quietly. "We're not doing that." The light intensified. He clenched his fist as if that might help. It didn't. When he looked back up, she was closer. He hadn't seen her move. "Okay," he said again, because his vocabulary was clearly not prepared for this. "That's new. That's definitely new." Her attention, if that was the right word, fixed on his arm. The room seemed to narrow around that single point. For the first time, something changed in her stillness. Not movement, not emotion. Just recognition. And that was worse. Because whatever she was, whatever she represented, the moment she saw those marks, something vast and ancient shifted into place. Like a decision had just been made. Far beyond the outpost, beyond the dying star, something in the dark between galaxies stirred. He swallowed, glancing between her and the glowing lines on his skin. "I'm going to assume," he said carefully, "that this is about me." The lines pulsed again. This time they almost felt like they were listening. He kept his eyes on her for a long moment, mostly to confirm she wouldn't suddenly multiply or start speaking in 17 voices at once. She didn't. That was reassuring. Slightly. In the way a silent storm cloud is reassuring because at least it hasn't started throwing lightning yet. "All right," he said, lifting his hand slowly. "Ground rules. You don't erase me from existence. I don't panic in a deeply embarrassing way. Deal." Nothing. Good, productive start. His arm flared again, sharper this time, like something inside the lines had just woken up and was stretching. He hissed under his breath, shaking his hand. "Okay, that's less productive." The light from the mark spilled outward, faint threads drifting into the air like smoke that had forgotten how to dissipate. They didn't fade. They hovered. And then, against all reason, they began to form shapes. He stared. "No, no, no, we are not projecting things now. That feels like an escalation." The shapes twisted, aligning into fragments, angles that didn't belong together, surfaces folding inward without meeting, something that almost resembled a structure if you looked at it wrong enough. His stomach turned. "Yeah, that's definitely not architecture." She moved, not a step, not a shift. The space between them simply shortened again, like distance had been deemed unnecessary. The air grew heavier, pressing against his thoughts more than his body. He felt examined, not in the casual, curious sense, but in a precise, deliberate way, like every version of him that had ever existed was being lined up and compared. "Listen," he said quickly, gesturing at the floating shapes. "I don't know what that is, but I'm 90% sure I didn't build it. I can barely assemble a chair without emotional consequences." The shapes flickered, a sound followed. Not from her, not from the room, it came from the lines. A low, layered tone, like several voices trying to speak at once but refusing to agree on the language. He froze. "That's new. That's very new." The tone shifted, rising slightly, and with it came something else. A memory, except it wasn't his. He saw a sky, if it could be called that, fractured into impossible colors, each one bleeding into the next without mixing. Structures hung in that sky, vast and incomplete, their edges folding inward like they were trying to hide from themselves. There were figures moving between them, tall, indistinct, their forms flickering in and out of clarity. He blinked hard. The outpost snapped back into place around him. He staggered, catching himself on the console. "Okay, I didn't enjoy that." The lines dimmed slightly, as if satisfied. He pointed at his arm. "You don't get to just show me things. There's a process for that. Consent forms maybe a warning label." Silence. He exhaled, slower this time, trying to steady himself. "All right, let's assume you're not here for small talk." She didn't answer, but something in the space shifted again. Not around him, through him. The pressure deepened, threading into his thoughts. He felt it touch the edges of his memory, not ripping, not forcing, just opening. Another image surfaced. This time it was darker, a battlefield, or something that used to be one. The ground was wrong, bending under invisible weight. The sky was gone entirely, replaced by a vast emptiness that seemed to pulse with distant, unseen movement. And in the center, him, but not quite. He was standing there unmoving, the lines across his body blazing with the same unnatural light. Except they were different, complete, connected. He sucked in a breath, stumbling back again as the vision collapsed. "No," he said immediately. "No, I don't like that version of me. He looks like he makes bad decisions." The room settled. The floating shapes dissolved, the light from his arm pulling back into the lines, leaving them dim but restless. She remained exactly where she was, watching, always watching. He met that impossible gaze, forcing a thin, uneasy smile. "So," he said, voice quieter now, "you saw that too, right? Because if that was just me, we have a much bigger problem than I thought." For the first time something changed. Not movement, not expression. But the silence itself shifted, carrying something heavier, something deliberate. And then, without sound, without motion, an understanding pressed into his mind. Not words, not language, but something clearer than both. Recognition. Not of him. Of what was inside him. His smile faded. Yeah, he murmured, glancing down at his arm again. That tracks, of course it's not about me. The lines pulsed once more. This time they almost felt pleased. He stared at his arm like it had personally betrayed him, which, to be fair, was becoming a recurring theme. The faint glow settled into a slow rhythm, almost calm now, like it had just finished explaining something extremely complicated and expected applause. "I'm not clapping," he said under his breath. "You don't get applause for existential problems." The lines ignored him. Of course they did. He glanced back up at her, shifting his weight uneasily. "So, let's summarize. I've got ancient, possibly illegal geometry embedded in my body. It's showing me things I definitely didn't sign up for. And you," he pointed at her, "are reacting like someone just found a loaded weapon in a library." Silence answered him, but it wasn't empty. It pressed in, patient, deliberate, waiting. "Great," he muttered. "We're in the waiting phase, love the waiting phase." The outpost trembled, not violently, not enough to knock anything over, just enough to make everything feel uncertain. Like the structure itself was reconsidering its commitment to being a structure. He frowned, glancing toward the viewport. "Please tell me that's normal." The star outside didn't flicker this time. It dimmed. Not fading, dimming. Like something vast had moved between it and the station, blocking a portion of its light with careful precision. He blinked. "Okay, that's definitely not normal." The shadows in the room stretched slightly, not following the expected angles. He watched one creep along the wall, hesitating for a fraction of a second before continuing in a direction that made no sense. "You see that too, right?" he asked, gesturing vaguely. "Because I'm starting to feel like I'm the only one concerned about physics taking a break." She didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the change. But something in her presence sharpened, like her attention had shifted far beyond the walls of the outpost. The lines on his arm reacted instantly. They flared again, brighter than before, the light spilling outward in thin, branching threads. The air filled with those impossible shapes once more, but this time they didn't stay fragmented. They connected. He took a slow step back. No, we talked about this. We're not escalating." The shapes locked into place, forming something larger, something disturbingly coherent. A pattern, a map, or maybe a mechanism. The same low, layered tone returned, louder now, resonating through his chest instead of just his ears. And with it, another memory. He was standing again, but not in the outpost, not anywhere he recognized. The space around him folded inward, bending into itself like it was trying to hide something enormous behind something smaller. Voices surrounded him, not spoken, not heard, felt, agreement, coordination, intent. He felt himself, another version of himself, standing still, arms at his sides, the lines across his body blazing in perfect symmetry. And then they opened, not like wounds, like doors. He snapped back, gasping, gripping the edge of the console hard enough to make his knuckles ache. "Okay, nope. Absolutely not. That's where I draw the line. Doors are where I draw the line." The shapes in the air flickered, unstable for a moment before settling again. He shook his head, forcing a laugh that didn't quite land. "I don't even like regular doors. Too many expectations. You open one, suddenly there's consequences." The outpost trembled again. This time something distant answered. A signal, not from the station, not from anything human. It brushed against the edges of his awareness like a whisper that had traveled too far to stay intact. Broken. Fragmented but intentional, he went still. "You felt that." It wasn't a question. Her presence shifted, not toward him, outward, expanding. For the first time he got the distinct impression that she wasn't just in the room, she was reaching. The pressure in the air deepened, threading outward into something he couldn't see, couldn't fully understand. It moved past the station, past the dimming star, into the vast, quiet dark beyond. And something out there responded. Not immediately. Not loudly, just enough. A silence far larger than the one in the room collapsed slightly, like something had just noticed it was being watched. He swallowed. I'm going to go ahead and assume that's not a friendly neighbor checking in. The lines pulsed again, faster this time, eager. He looked down at them, his expression flattening. Oh no, don't you dare be excited about this. They didn't listen. Of course they didn't. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his hair. All right, new plan. He looked up at her, meeting that impossible, unreadable gaze. You clearly know what's happening, he said. And I clearly don't. So unless your strategy is to stand there and let the universe get progressively worse, which, bold choice, by the way, we're going to need to start communicating. The room held its breath. The distant presence lingered, patient, aware. And for the first time since she arrived, the silence between them shifted in a way that felt almost like a response. Not words, not yet, but closer, close enough to make his chest tighten. Yeah, he muttered quietly, that's what I was afraid of. He stood very still, mostly because moving felt like it might count as volunteering for something. The lines along his arm pulsed in a steady rhythm now, not frantic anymore, focused, which in his experience was significantly worse. Okay, he said, glancing between them and her. We've reached the part where things either get explained or explode. I'm rooting for explanation, just to be clear. Something shifted. Not outside, not in the distant dark, inside him. The pressure returned, but it wasn't invasive this time. It didn't pry, it aligned. Like 1,000 scattered pieces quietly deciding to fit together, he winced. Oh, that's new. That's definitely new. The lines brightened, not violently, but with intent. The shapes formed again, faster now, cleaner, no hesitation in their structure, not fragments anymore. A system. He exhaled slowly, watching it stabilize in the air. Right, so we're building something. That's comforting. I love it when mysterious forces start assembling things around me. The low tone returned, but it no longer felt chaotic. It carried direction, meaning he understood not all of it, not even most of it, but enough. It's not a weapon, he said quietly, more to himself than to her. It's a correction. The lines pulsed once in agreement. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Of course it is, because galaxy-ending device would have been too simple. Another memory surfaced, but this time it didn't knock him off balance. He saw it clearly. The others, the ones who had done this. Not monsters, not gods, just terrified minds trying to control something they didn't understand. They had taken pieces of something older, something that didn't belong to them, and tried to lock it away. Inside him, a failsafe. Or a mistake. Yeah, he murmured, that tracks, classic overcomplication. He looked up at her. You already know this, he said. You're not hunting me, you're hunting them. The silence didn't deny it, but it didn't confirm it either. Because it didn't matter anymore. The distant presence beyond the star shifted again, stronger now, closer, not attacking, waiting. He took a breath, steadying himself. All right, new understanding, I'm not the problem. The lines flickered. Okay, I'm part of the problem, he corrected, but not in the fun, catastrophic way. The structure in the air rotated slightly, aligning with him. No, aligning through him. He felt it settle, not taking control, but offering it. A choice, he grimaced. I don't like choices. Choices imply responsibility. The lines pulsed, he sighed. Yeah, I figured you'd say that. He stepped forward. The pressure increased instantly, the room tightening as if reality itself was leaning in to watch. He glanced back at her one last time. You could have just said something, you know. A quick hey, don't panic, you're secretly a cosmic reset button. Would have helped. For the first time, something in her presence shifted. Not quite emotion, but close enough to feel like acknowledgement. He smiled faintly. Yeah, didn't think so. He turned back. The lines opened, not painfully, not violently, smooth, deliberate. The structure completed itself through him, not as a release but as a restoration. The fractured signals, the distant presence, the silent imbalance spreading across systems, it all snapped into alignment. Not erased, corrected. Far beyond the outpost, the watching presence stilled, then withdrew, not defeated, finished. The hum in the station faded. The star beyond the viewport steadied, its light returning to something that resembled normal. He exhaled slowly, lowering his arm. The lines dimmed, still there but quiet now, no longer whispering. He blinked a few times. He looked around. Same broken consoles, same tired star, same him, mostly. He flexed his fingers, testing the absence of that constant underlying tension. Okay, that's new, in a good way. He glanced at her again. So that's it. No dramatic aftermath, no galaxy-wide applause. Silence, he nodded. Right, subtle ending, I respect it. He leaned back against the console, letting out a breath that felt like it had been waiting a long time. You know, for a second there, I really thought I was going to destroy everything. A pause, still not ruling it out completely, he added. I've been wrong before. The lines didn't respond, for once. He smiled slightly, pushing himself upright. All right, I guess that's progress. He looked out at the quiet, steady star, then back at her. So what now? He asked. The silence lingered, but this time it wasn't heavy, it was open. He tilted his head, considering that, then gave a small shrug. Okay, he said, I can work with open. And for the first time since the wounds had appeared, since the whispers had started, since the universe had quietly begun rearranging itself around him, he didn't feel like something waiting to be used. He felt like someone who had already made the choice.